I knew something was off the moment Sloan rolled his eyes while Cal was speaking. We were in the middle of reviewing a critical compliance envelope for an $80 million pitch, and Cal, calm, methodical Cal, was going over the risk matrix like he always did, line by line, no drama. The guy never rushed. He didn't care about flair or theatrics, but Sloan? He practically vibrated with disdain, tapping his pen like a teenager in detention. "No one reads policy documents, old man," he muttered loud enough for the room to hear. Cal didn't react, just clicked his trackpad, uploaded the signed compliance file with his credential, and sat back in his chair like he hadn't just been publicly slapped. That's the thing about Cal. He didn't need to raise his voice. His work was the voice. Every policy signed, every protocol reviewed. His name wasn't just ink, it was leverage. But Sloan didn't get that. He saw a quiet strategist in a sweater vest and assumed useless. And that assumption? It was about to cost him everything. It's wild how quickly people dismiss the boring ones. Cal wasn't flashy. He didn't grab beers after work or post LinkedIn selfies with clients. But behind every successful deal we'd landed in the last 3 years, his signature sat quietly on page 1, anchoring our credibility. I should have said something. But back then, I was just a junior legal analyst, still trying not to breathe too loud, still too green to question Sloan's shiny confidence. Cal gave me a look once during that meeting, just one, and I swear it said, "Don't worry, they always learn the hard way." By the way, quick interruption, but if you're still listening and haven't subscribed yet, this is your sign. Seriously, 97% of people watch and never hit that little button, and it means the world to the team when you do. A like helps more than you know. All right, back in. We didn't know it then, but Cal had just embedded his custodial key into the framework. It wasn't part of standard protocol. It was smarter, preemptive, because what Sloan had done in his little tantrum was push through a version of the pitch that trimmed unnecessary disclosures. He called it optimization. Cal called it malpractice, just not out loud. I remember watching him cross-check clauses in silence while the rest of us rehearsed our slide transitions. It was like watching someone build a bomb shelter while everyone else danced in the rain. That morning, while Sloan adjusted his cufflinks and practiced catchphrases in the mirror, Cal was validating encryption threads tied to policy attestations. While Sloan bragged about investor psychology, Cal was reading breach response clauses in the insurer's fine print, one of which required his signature on the framework to trigger coverage. And I swear, Cal knew, not just that Sloan was going to screw it up, but how. There was a moment, small, nothing flashy, when Cal double-checked his credential metadata and wrote something down in a plain black notebook. Not a planner, not a laptop, a notebook. He tapped the page once, closed it, and exhaled, like a man setting the last domino in a line no one else noticed. I didn't realize the significance until much later. At the time, all I saw was a quiet man making peace with being ignored. The rest of us moved on. Legal signed off on the VP's modified disclosures. Risk management shrugged and said we'd cross-reference post-pitch. Cal didn't argue. He uploaded the original version, his version, and logged it under the company's compliance archive. Time-stamped, secured, attested. And then he leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and watched Sloan practice smiling for the investors. He wasn't just ready for the pitch. He was ready for what came after. It started with that damn smirk. We were 2 days out from the investor pitch, final prep meeting, the kind where everyone pretends they're aligned while quietly sharpening knives. Cal, as always, had printed the updated version of the compliance statement, paper, not digital, and passed it around without a word. Sloan took one look at it, didn't even flip the page, and chuckled like he'd just seen a squirrel in a suit. Then, with that tone slow and venomous, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Don't speak unless you're spoken to." Laughter. Not a lot, but just enough to sting. 2 of the product guys smirked into their coffees. I didn't. I felt my stomach knot because I knew Cal. That silence? That wasn't retreat. That was recording. Observing. Cal didn't take notes to remember what happened. He took them to prove it did. Still, he didn't flinch. Just nodded like a man clocking weather patterns before a storm. After the meeting, he didn't go to HR. He didn't puff up his chest or demand respect. He just asked for access to the final pitch deck. And when he opened it, I saw the moment his posture shifted. Slight, but real. The deck was altered. The disclosures about our breach detection SLA had been stripped out. Language about data sovereignty, gone. A full clause on federal audit compliance redacted and replaced with a single bullet point, meets all standards. It was like watching a bomb technician realize someone had tampered with the wires mid-diffusal. He flagged it, quietly. Emailed legal and asked for a version history, time-stamped edit logs, clarification on who had approval authority. I remember the reply from one of our attorneys. Per updated org chart, the VP has final say now. No discussion, no context, just a brush-off dressed as protocol. He didn't push, didn't debate, just replied, "Understood, logging discrepancy for compliance records." Then he copied himself on an encrypted backup and sent it to the secure archive. I saw the subject line in the outbox, framework variants, Rev D. Nobody noticed, nobody cared, except Cal and me. Because by then, I'd started noticing the patterns. Sloan wanted flash, clean lines, buzzwords. He wanted the pitch to feel like a TED Talk, not a technical briefing. And disclosures? They weren't sexy. They were dead weight. Just like, in his mind, Cal. What Sloan didn't get, what he refused to get, was that in enterprise compliance, omission isn't efficiency, it's liability. The investors weren't just buying our tech, they were buying the safeguards wrapped around it, safeguards Cal had architected. And without them, we were just another software company, promising the moon with a wet paper parachute. I remember walking past the break room that afternoon and seeing Cal alone, eating yogurt and reviewing a hard copy of the original deck. No headphones, no distractions, just flipping pages, scribbling in that black notebook. It looked like he was studying for someone else's test, because he already knew the answers. He wasn't rattled, not yet. But something was building. You could feel it in the way he paused before turning each page like he was waiting for the rest of the house to notice it was on fire. But no one did. Instead, Sloan kept posturing. Legal kept deflecting. And I kept quiet, like everyone else. Because what were we supposed to say? That the quiet guy might actually be the one holding the detonator? We had no idea. But Cal did. It happened faster than anyone could process, like watching someone light a match without realizing the room was filled with gas. We were 30 minutes into the pitch, third rotation of slides, the part where Sloan's voice always got a little too slick. He was promising end-to-end liability coverage, no exceptions, like we were handing out insurance certificates in a cereal box. I could see the investors starting to squint. The kind of squint that means they're about to ask the question that decides whether this is a deal or just theater. And then it came. The lead investor, a woman from the Zurich group with eyes like surgical lights, leaned forward and asked, "Can you walk us through the attestation chain? Specifically, who's listed as the policy owner on your breach compliance framework?" The room stalled. Sloan faltered. He looked toward legal. Legal blinked. Then, from the far end of the table, Cal spoke. Quietly. "Yes. Clause 4.1 states that the breach framework is only enforceable under active custodial signature. That's me." He didn't gloat, didn't perform. He just said the truth. I wish to God Sloan had let it go. I wish he'd nodded, smiled, pivoted. But no. He went red, full Stormfront red, and slammed his palm on the table. "Absolutely not," he barked. "That's outdated. We revised that protocol last week." Cal tilted his head. The policy was never reattested. No revision was logged. And that's when Sloan lost it. "Pack your things and go. Now." Dead silence. I felt the air vacuum out of the room. You could hear the projector fan buzzing. Legal froze, mid-breath. The investor just stared. Not shocked. Just calculating. And Cal? He looked at Sloan like he was watching a toddler throw a tantrum in traffic. Then he turned to legal. Just a glance. Not a plea, not a challenge, a chance for someone to step in, correct the mistake, stop the train before it hit the bridge. No one moved. So Cal nodded once, closed his laptop with a soft click that echoed louder than any slammed door ever could, stood up, straightened his cuffs, and walked out. No words, no folder grabbing, no threats, just silence. I watched him go. Watched the door close behind him like the end of a chapter none of us realized we were in. Sloan cleared his throat, tried to recover, as I was saying, But it was over. Not the pitch, not yet. But something bigger, something structural. Cal wasn't just a voice in that room. He was the policy, the spine, the reason any of our insurance partners even looked at us twice. And now he was gone. On record. Mid-pitch. After stating in front of legal counsel and investors that the very policy we were selling wasn't legally active. It was the moment the light dimmed, just slightly, but enough for all of us to realize. We weren't in control anymore. We just didn't know how far we'd fallen. Not yet, but we would. Where's the key signatory for the policy protocol? That's all the investor asked. Simple. Neutral. But her tone cut cleaner than any accusation ever could. Everyone shifted. Eyes darted to legal. Sloan didn't even flinch. He was still riding the high of his public execution. Like firing Cal had won him some sort of dominance contest. He sipped his water. He was just compliance, he said with a shrug that might have worked in a boardroom full of interns. We've got a team on it now. But legal didn't move. Not at first. Then Sarah, the associate counsel sitting 2 seats from me, reached for the printed deck. Her fingers trembled just a little as she flipped to the policy protocol summary. Page 1, top left corner. Custodial owner, C. Harper. The air shifted. No one breathed. Sarah blinked twice, then flipped through the rest of the deck like she was hoping the name would magically vanish. It didn't. He owns the policy, she said, voice suddenly quieter. Literally. Sloan chuckled, a little too loud. Come on, the framework's a formality. The policy's embedded in the product. Our stack is still airtight. But Sarah didn't laugh. It's not embedded. It's attested. The insurance coverage, audit pathways, the federal compliance affidavit, they're all tied to his custodial signature. The system architecture doesn't functionally validate without it. Now even the junior analysts were looking up. The Zurich rep folded her hands. Are you saying the active protocol we're reviewing hasn't been attested by the designated signatory? Legal didn't answer. They didn't have to. The silence did it for them. Sloan leaned forward, suddenly defensive. We've got backup protocols. I can loop in our engineering lead. There's no need to panic. That's when the second investor, a man from the Sydney group, quiet until now, spoke up. You fired the compliance strategist on record during the pitch after he directly contradicted your liability claim, and now you're telling us the document we're reviewing may not be valid. Sarah closed the deck. It's not a may. We've never reattested since Cal's last update. His key is the root credential. Without it, the policy's void. I could see Sloan's jaw clench. His hand hovered over his phone like he wanted to call someone, anyone, and reverse time. But there was no version of this where his arrogance didn't cost us credibility. And somewhere, probably already back at his apartment, Cal knew. He knew the moment he walked out that this exact conversation would unfold. That someone would ask the one question Sloan couldn't bluff his way through. That legal would flip to page 1. That the name would still be there. And it was. He hadn't screamed, hadn't slammed a door. He'd left a signature, nothing more. But that signature, it was the floor we were standing on. And now it was gone. They tried to play it cool at first. The Zurich lead kept her voice even when she said, "Before we proceed, we'll need digital confirmation of the active attestation. Timestamp, credentials, hash chain, all of it. We've been burned before." And for a second, I could almost believe everything might smooth over. Almost. Sarah nodded, stood slowly, and walked to the control console. She didn't say anything dramatic, just pulled up the compliance verification system like she'd done it a dozen times before. Her fingers moved fast, familiar, confident, and then she stopped. She didn't speak. She just blinked at the screen. The room, already taut, went completely still. Sloan broke the silence. Something wrong? Still casual, like the world wasn't splintering under his feet. Sarah cleared her throat. It's asking for the custodial key. Use the default override, Sloan said, tapping his pen like that would solve it. We've got admin credentials. Just bypass it. Sarah looked at him like he'd asked her to hotwire a plane mid-air. That's not how Cal built it. I remember that line so clearly. Not, that's not how the system works. Not, I can't do it. No. That's not how Cal built it, because it was his. Every compliance structure, every security attestation, every policy envelope, it wasn't just legally attributed to him. It was architected around him, with intentional bottlenecks, verification loops, fail-safes that required one thing, his encrypted key. Legal tried again. A different route this time. No luck. The system spit out the same message 3 times in a row. Custodial signature not detected, access denied. The Zurich investor leaned back in her chair, not angry, just done. You're running a protocol-dependent liability framework without a current signatory? Sarah didn't even answer. Her hands were still hovering over the keyboard like she was waiting for divine intervention. Sloane's tone changed. Get it in here, now. One of the assistants bolted out of the room like her life depended on it. 5 minutes later, our head of infrastructure, a guy named Rick who'd worked under Cal for 6 years, walked in. Still chewing a protein bar, still clueless. Sloane pointed to the screen. Override the key check. We need access to the attestation layer. Rick scanned the interface once, then again, then slowly stepped back. That's a hard lock. Cal's key has a multi-factor chain linked to the policy ledger. I can't override it without his biometric pair or revocation sequence. Sloane looked like he'd been punched in the throat. You're telling me there's no way to access the policy? Rick's face didn't change. I'm telling you Cal designed this to be tamper-proof. That's what you wanted, remember? And that's when it landed. Not for the rest of us. We'd already pieced it together. But for Sloane, the reality hit him full in the chest. The entire framework, the one we'd sold as airtight, investor-grade, bulletproof, was locked behind the one man he'd shoved out the door in front of a global investment team. The dread in that room didn't come in a scream. It didn't come in panic. It came in the quiet shift of power, when everyone looked around and realized the door wasn't just closed. It had been designed to stay that way. The call came at 7:46 p.m., exactly 2 hours after the pitch imploded. I was still in the office, pretending to work, while half the exec floor wandered around like survivors of a shipwreck. Sloane had disappeared. No one knew if he'd been fired or was just hiding under a desk somewhere. Legal was triaging investors, and our CTO had gone outside to scream into his Tesla. That's when I saw Sarah, our general counsel, slip into the glass conference room and close the door behind her with a soft click. She didn't even turn the lights on, just stood there, staring at her phone like it might bite her. She called Cal. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't have to. I saw it in her face, tight, rehearsed, desperate. She was trying to lead with charm, soften the ask, as if Cal had just stepped away for a dentist appointment, not been publicly humiliated in a room full of international investors. I found out later what he said. She started with, "Hey, Cal, how are you?" He replied, "Is this a personal call or a company matter?" She hesitated. "Can we have a conversation?" Cal didn't bite. He didn't ask how things were going, didn't ask if they missed him. Just said, "Do you need the protocol reattested?" Silence on her end. Then, finally, "Yes. The investors won't proceed without it. Sloane said you could—" He did? That's what he asked. Not bitter, just curious. Like a man flipping through a case study of his own life, wondering how the characters managed to be so predictably stupid. She tried to recover. "Look, Cal, the deal's on hold. We need the framework validated by Monday. You're still the registered owner of the compliance protocol. Nobody else can—" Cal cut in. "I'm aware of what I own." More silence. Then she asked carefully, "Would you be open to coming in, just to reactivate it, for continuity?" He didn't say no, but he didn't say yes. He laid out terms. Cal didn't bluff, didn't rant. He just recited what was already in motion, like reading off a checklist. 1. Indemnity. Full legal protection against any claims arising from the modified deck or subsequent misrepresentation. Sarah said, "We can draft." 2. Consulting status. I don't return as staff. I invoice at partner rate and I retain authorship rights over all compliance structures going forward. That's reasonable, she said slowly. 3. He continued without pause. Sloane's removal. Not a reprimand, not a suspension. He doesn't stay in the building. There was a beat. Then she whispered, "That might be difficult." "If he's still on payroll, I'm unavailable," Cal said, flat. "My signature requires integrity. His presence nullifies that." Sarah didn't respond, but she didn't hang up either. She knew. They'd underestimated the quiet guy in the sweater vest, the man who never interrupted, the one they thought could be dismissed with a single line. But Cal hadn't been waiting to be noticed. He'd been building something. And now, they weren't just asking for help. They were negotiating with the man who held the key to their survival. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. It was like watching a room hold its breath for 30 minutes straight. The board reconvened the next morning, 8:00 a.m. sharp. No bagels, no banter, no Sloan. His name was still on the agenda printout, but someone had drawn a thick line through it in pen. Permanent. Like a tombstone with the wrong date crossed out. The atmosphere had shifted. Less courtroom, more triage. Nobody wanted to speak first. Even the Zurich lead, who normally carried herself like a closing bell on Wall Street, sat with arms folded, lips pressed so tight they could have sliced glass. The pitch materials sat in silence, projected but blank, like a stage missing its lead actor. And then the door opened. Cal walked in without ceremony. No badge, no blazer. Just a gray sweater over a white button-up, the same outfit he wore the day he was fired. But this time, when he stepped up to the table, legal stood. Not out of panic, out of respect. The chair cleared his throat. "Let the record reflect the reintroduction of C. Harper," he said almost sheepishly. "Chief Policy Architect, external consultant." Nobody clapped. This wasn't that kind of moment. It was quieter than that. He nodded once in acknowledgement, set his leather folio on the table, and opened it with a kind of mechanical calm. No rustling, no drama. Just precision. He pulled out a small encrypted drive and plugged it into the presentation system. The screen flickered, then lit up with something we hadn't seen since the beginning of the pitch cycle, a full compliance tree, green across every branch. The attestation hash had verified instantly, time-stamped to within the hour. His signature appeared at the base, clear as a sunrise. The Zurich lid leaned forward. "This is real-time validation?" Cal answered without looking at her. "This is the original framework, updated with investor-specific clauses and reattested under sovereign key, independent of product stack, built to be air-gapped for integrity." Translation. It couldn't be faked, edited, or sold without him. The Sydney investor, quiet as always, gave a single nod, and just like that, the deal was back on track. No one jumped up. No one cheered. But I saw the shift. The tension in Legal's shoulders finally dropping, the head of finance exhaling like he'd been underwater since Thursday. The pitch continued, this time with facts, not flair. Sloane's glimmering promises were replaced by bulletproof clauses and calibrated thresholds. And the investors? They leaned in, not because they were charmed, but because they finally believed what they were seeing. Cal didn't gloat, didn't even smirk. When it ended, the board chair turned to Legal and asked quietly, "Was that always necessary?" Sarah didn't blink. "Yes, we just never asked." And that was it. No fanfare, no apology tour, just the truth. Cold, undeniable, and long overdue. Cal unplugged his drive, tucked it away, and for the first time since he'd been erased from the room, every person there made sure not to look away. The official notice hit inboxes at 9:12 a.m. Richard Sloane has been separated from the company effective immediately for cause. No thank you, no best wishes on future endeavors. Just cold language framed in legal armor. What followed wasn't a whisper campaign. It was a landslide. The internal memo came next, circulated by Legal, signed by the chair. Title: Reinforcement of Custodial Frameworks in Investor Materials. Buried beneath the jargon was a sentence that made half the executive team flinch. All future attestations must include clear authorship, custodial ownership, and timestamp validation, cross-referenced in every board-level deck and legal packet. No exceptions. Translation: No more hiding the foundation under someone else's branding. No more repackaging Cal's work with prettier fonts and bolder promises. Every line, every layer, every risk-managed clause had to come with a name. And now, everyone in that building knew whose name actually mattered. As for Sloane, his golden parachute evaporated. Legal confirmed his misconduct had violated two key clauses in his executive contract: unauthorized modification of investor materials and termination of a designated signatory without compliance review. That second one? Cal had written it. Years ago. Nobody paid attention back then. Now it was the trap door that sent Sloan plummeting, and when the board tried to fix it the old way, quietly, internally without headlines, they reached for Cal again, offered him a full reinstatement. Bigger title, triple comp package, staff of 10, a new corner office with whatever view he wanted. He said no, not dramatically, not out of spite, just no. I don't work for silence anymore, he said during the call. I work by agreement. And that wasn't just about contracts. That was a philosophy. Cal had always been the man behind the curtain, the quiet brain they leaned on in crisis but ignored during the calm. They thought discretion meant obedience. They thought calm meant weakness. But what they missed, what Sloan never understood, is that Cal's silence had never been submission. It had been strategy. He wasn't the man they could summon in emergencies and then erase from the credits. Not anymore. They had forced him into visibility, and now they'd have to live with the cost. He didn't rage, didn't leak to the press, didn't burn the place down. He just declined. On the record. With terms. He would consult, on retainer, on his timeline, on his contracts, because he didn't need their office. He didn't need their badge. He had something they could never replicate, a legacy built into the code of the company itself. And now, finally, that legacy had a name. The launch came quietly. No rooftop champagne, no overhyped press releases. Just a subtle update to the company site one Monday morning. A new division, specializing in secure enterprise compliance, backed by a refined framework certified for federal and international standards. The buzzword brigade had been dialed back, the pitch deck simplified, but buried in the footer of every downloadable policy packet, printed in clean serif font, sat one line. Certified by custodial architect C. Harper, not consultant, not contractor, custodial architect. A title no one had ever held before, and one that no one dared to hold again. There was no internal ceremony, no nameplate unveiling. That wasn't Cal's way. Instead, his presence echoed in more subtle forms, in the new onboarding protocol that required policy authorship signatures, in the redesigned compliance database with locked metadata, in the fact that no single clause went live without at least one name attached to it. One afternoon, I overheard it, the kind of conversation that makes you stop mid-step. A new analyst, maybe 2 months in, fresh out of grad school, was reviewing a doc and asked, "Who's Cal Harper? I see his name everywhere, but he's not on the org chart." The room went quiet for a beat. Then the COO, who'd once ignored Cal completely, looked up from his laptop and said simply, "The reason this company still exists." No embellishment. No performative reverence, just fact. You see, legacies aren't loud. They don't live in awards or titles. They live in the things that don't break because someone built them right. Cal never wanted applause. He wanted systems that couldn't be bent by ego, protocols that couldn't be hijacked by ambition. And when they tried to erase him, he didn't fight it. He let the system speak for itself. Because that's the difference between influence and authorship. You can sway a room, you can spin a story, but you can't fake a framework. Not when the foundation has a name burned into the ledger. And Cal. He knew exactly what he was building. The final page of the new compliance manual doesn't have a logo. It doesn't have a mission statement. It has a single line of text, centered and understated, certified by custodial architect C. Harper. You can delete a name from a room, but not from a page they built.